On March 24th, 1972, the movie The Godfather, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, premiered in New York City. And one of the guests in attendance was the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger. And supposedly, after the movie was over, Kissinger went up to Coppola and said, "That was a great movie because it makes you root for the bad guy." So how does The Godfather make you root for a man who's killed hundreds of people? Well, Mario Puzo's secret was he made Don Corleone a family man, right? He's shown to do all these horrible things, commit murders and bribe judges and plan wars, etc., etc. But he's also shown to be very, very good to the people around him, right? Even people who, are much less powerful than he is, who he doesn't really have to take care of. In the middle of the novel and in the second movie, there's a little story about the old woman who's being evicted from her apartment because she kept a pet without her landlord's permission. And Don Corleone goes to the landlord and reasons with him and gets her to let the old woman stay. When you do stuff like that, it makes people like you, even if they kind of know in the back of their heads that you're not such a good guy. In The Godfather, you see these two separate worlds, right? The first is the world we live in, the one that's governed by politicians and laws and lawyers and judges and stuff like that. And then you also see Don Corleone's world, which is governed by threats and backroom deals and favors. If you were growing up in New York in 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, you basically had to choose, right? Are you going to be a part of the outside America world, or are you going to be a part of the mafia world? At the beginning of the novel, we see Amerigo Bonacera, who has chosen to be part of the outside America world, governed by courts and laws and judges. And his name is literally Amerigo, for Christ's sake. And he is in the courtroom because his daughter has been attacked and sent to the hospital by these two hoodlums. And the judge gives the hoodlums a suspended sentence. It turns out, one of them was the son of some powerful politician or whatever. And Amerigo's like, what the hell? Like, these guys beat the crap out of my daughter. They ruined her honor. They sent her to the hospital. What am I supposed to do? And so he goes to Don Corleone, and he gets his revenge on these two boys within Don Corleone's world. So which world would you rather live in? I think most people would say the outside America world because, all you have to do is take a look at the island of Sicily, right? Like, Sicily is ruled the same way that the mafia is ruled. And Sicily, for a long time, was a really bad place to live. The murder rate was super high, and it was dangerous, and it was a bloodbath. But when you read The Godfather, you kind of wonder for a second. One of the lines that gets repeated over and over again in The Godfather, at least in the book, is every man has but only one destiny, right? Don Corleone says that anytime he gets the chance. And do you feel that that's true, right? Like, I, coming from 21st century America, from a really privileged background, like, I can do whatever I want. I travel the world. I don't feel like I have only one destiny. I feel like I can do basically anything. But I can understand how somebody coming from Don Corleone's background, right? Like, he got expelled from the island of Sicily when he was 12, and he had to take care of his family. He had to survive. And so what was he going to do, right? Like, did he have the option to join American society at large? Did he have the option to, go and get a job? Probably not, right? Like, he kind of just had to be in the mafia. Similarly, Michael Corleone didn't want to be in the mafia either, right? Like, he went and signed up for the army, and then he went to Dartmouth, and he wanted to be a professor, but he had to take care of his dad, right? Events beyond his control pulled him into the orbit of the mafia, and he was the only one who could take over for his dad when he was going to retire, and he had to get revenge for the death of Sonny and for the attack on Don Corleone. And so, like, what was he going to do? In a way, it kind of reminds me of the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where the main character, he wants to go and travel the world and do all this stuff, and he keeps getting pulled back home by responsibilities and by big events beyond his control. Another theme of the book that I thought was really interesting was the theme of succession, right? Like, how does Don Corleone pick Michael to replace him and then prepare Michael to replace him? This is something that a lot of businesses get very wrong, right? And when you think about it, it's easy to understand why, right? Imagine if you build a business from the ground up. You started it from nothing, and now it's a $10 million a year business or whatever, and you're going to retire, or you think you're going to die soon, and so you start preparing your son to replace you in the business. Well, there are three reasons why that gets screwed up, right? The first is that nobody's ever going to know more about the business than you do. You built the company from the ground up. That means you're the one who knows the most about it. You know all the ins and outs. You know how this works. You know how that works. The person you're preparing to replace you isn't going to know that stuff. The second reason why succession in business is so hard is because you have to pick the right person, right? You have to pick a person with the right skills and the right demeanor, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes you don't even know what those skills are. Add on top of that the people you're picking to be your successor, usually they're going to be people that you know very well, right? They're going to be either longtime employees or friends, or usually, in the case of the Godfather, your son. And that can get messy because you've got all these emotions surrounding this person, and those might cloud your judgment. They might not have the chops to do the job, and if they don't have the chops to do the job, you might not be able to admit that to yourself. And then the final reason why business succession so often fails is because nobody's ever going to have the same reputation as the founder of the company, right? So for example, at Apple, Steve Jobs wanted to make a music player that only had 4 buttons. If John Scully had said, oh, we want to make an iPod with just 4 buttons, people would have looked at him and said, you're crazy, right? You can't make a music player that only has 4 buttons. How are you going to sort through the music? But Steve Jobs says so, and people are like, oh, yeah, Steve Jobs, he's super brilliant. He knows a lot about building electronics. If he says you can make a music player with only 4 buttons, then let's make a music player with only 4 buttons. The problem of succession is probably the reason why the real-life mafia collapsed, right? And you see the same thing in The Godfather. Things don't go according to plan for Michael Corleone, right? He says to Kay Adams, in 5 years, the Corleone family is going to be completely legitimate, and Kay's like, Michael, that was 7 years ago. And by the third film, Michael seemed to be totally losing his mind.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Of course, the problem with having the same person run the business for years and years and years and years and years is sometimes they can be out of touch, right? Sometimes they don't adapt to the new ways of doing things. Now, for example, I'm a big Raider fan, and when I was growing up, I would watch the twilight years of Al Davis, right? And Al Davis would try to do the exact same things that worked in the 80s. He would draft the fastest wide receiver in the draft. He would trade for the highest profile quarterback he could get. And it just didn't work, right? That's not how you build a football team in the 21st century. And this is another big theme we see in The Godfather, right? The reason why Sollozzo tries to have Don Corleone killed is because he says, Don Corleone is a mustache Pete. He doesn't understand the new way of doing things. He doesn't understand how big the drug business is going to be. If I'm dealing with Sonny, then, I can deal with somebody who understands the modern business landscape a little bit better. So that's it for today's Theo's Book Club. I hope you enjoyed. If you're new here, I'm Theo. I make brief videos like this one detailing the big ideas, the major themes of the books that I read so that you can learn what I learned and so you can decide, do I want to read this book myself? If you like this video, I'd greatly appreciate if you hit the like button. You can find it down there. Just tap it. That tells YouTube to share it with more people. And also, on the same note, if you like this video, if you want to see more videos like this one, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and you'll see my smiling face pop up in your feed more often. Have a great day.